My name is Björn Pommaspenger, and we're going to talk about measurements today. And this is not going to be a conversation about dashboards. It's going to be about how to figure out what's working when every marketing metric tries to tell a different story. We'll talk about how brands move beyond ROAS and last click to make smarter decisions. To discuss this, I've invited an amazing panel. So let's give it up with a warm applause for Jessika Ödling, Head of Measurement at Dema, and Jonatan Ehn, CCO at Asket. Yes, so let's start with a quick private introduction. Who are you, Jessika?
Private introduction.
Yeah. A professional introduction.
Professional, yeah. But private.
Yes.
Okay, sure. No, so I'm, as you said, leading measurement here at Dema. I've been working with this for the past 10 years. So obviously something I really enjoy since I'm dedicating my entire career to it so far. Previously worked at a market research consultancy, but e-com is way more fun. So I joined Dema about a year ago.
Nice. And how about you?
I joined Asket about 3 years ago. And before that, I worked in management consulting at Boston Consulting Group, but with focus on fashion retail.
Okay, and let's start by describing the problem here that I discussed in the introduction, Jessika.
Well, I mean, brands, obviously, you guys are well aware of this in the room, and also if you're listening on this afterwards, the brands are spending insane amounts of money on marketing, but it's very difficult both to understand what you're getting back in return, but also understanding how you can improve the decisions that you're making based with your marketing money. So it's an ongoing challenge, but it doesn't have to be.
And I find this topic super complicated. We've been talking in several podcasts about MMM as an example. I still kind of don't understand it, even though I tried for several hours. So it's very complicated, but let's not start there. Let's instead roll back 10 years. Where was measurement 10 years ago?
I don't have a clear marketing background. So when I first started to dip my toes into kind of marketing, digital marketing, that was around 10 years ago. I mean, return on ad spend was still like the metric. That was like everything was evaluated by it. And then I worked with like really big fashion brands, which had huge retainers with media agencies. So what they did was essentially just optimizing towards in-platform ROAS, which meant that like almost all the budget was spent on very low funnel and very non-incremental type of activities. So I think we've come quite far from there. And then I remember like one project with one client where they first time introduced a mixed marketing model. So it was a biannual, so it was run 2 times per year. And I think the data collection process of it took about 4 months. So I think it's there's clear differences from where we were versus where we are today. But some of the problems are, I think, still the same.
And let's start from the top, Jessika. What is measurement and what role does MMM or marketing mix modeling have within measurement?
So, I mean, measurement in general is sort of the act of understanding what you're getting back from your marketing investments, right? And there are a couple of different tools within this sort of wider toolkit. You mentioned last click or in-platform ROAS, that's one, it's click-based. What we've seen in the past years is a sort of quite large resurgence of marketing mix modeling. And for those of you who don't know what that is, basically it's a very sophisticated machine learning model that helps you to understand what you're getting back from your marketing investments without looking at clicks. So obviously this is something that's growing increasingly important as, you know, we have a huge increase in terms of privacy regulations and so on. But then again, as Jonatan mentioned, sort of looking back 10 years ago, there was a huge sort of data collection process needed to run these types of models. Now today we're in a situation where we have fantastic APIs from, you know, both ad platforms and the like. So we're also able to just run so much faster. So it's becoming a tool that's accessible to a wider audience, both in terms of price, but also in terms of the questions and the use cases that we're able to use this type of model to answer.
But why is it still so difficult, Jonatan?
I think it's because in the end, you kind of always gravitate back towards like chasing after the truth. And I think when it comes to marketing measurement, you won't get there because marketing measurement is a game of kind of like triangulation and moving quickly with good enough data. When you have like several data points like pointing in the right direction, then you can move as quickly as possible without kind of being reckless. But I think you always want the truth. And like today, I think it's even more difficult because there's more data, more tools, and you can like more KPIs. So like you need to be very like finding a good balance between having the right tools, being able to measure the KPIs that you want and need to, while not measuring everything, because I think you can always find a KPI that supports your story. And if you don't define your sources of truth, your KPIs, and your decision-making processes up front, then and try to do it afterwards, you can tell any story with the data. So it's a big challenge if you're not like consistent enough in your approach to marketing measurement.
And you mentioned the right tools. What are the right tools for Asket?
So I think the right tools for Asket, like if we go back just when I started 3 years ago, we didn't even have a clear kind of framework on how to evaluate our marketing performance. And I remember that like one of my first tasks was to set up a dashboard where we could track blended CAC, so customer acquisition cost, across markets. But I think today we don't have a perfect setup. I think that's a bit of an illusion when it comes to marketing measurement. But I think we have a functional setup where we have clearly defined like these are the decisions that we want to make. These are the processes to make those decisions. I think it's key to always start with the decisions and not with like the tech. And then, okay, to guide those decisions, what are the KPIs that we look at? And what is the source of truth for each of those KPIs? And that's like where the tech and measurement tools come in. If you take attribution versus mixed marketing modeling versus incrementality testing, I think those have their place, like in the hierarchy of decisions where they are strongest, but they also like have their strengths and weaknesses. So you have to know those, where to apply them, and also a little bit like you can't always go with one. This is like the one to look at. You always have to triangulate and look at all of them. How can you kind of use the results of one to calibrate the other and so on?
Jessika, where is measurement now in June 2025?
It's quite close to, we're obviously working together in these types of questions. It's going to be different across sort of both the maturity of the brand. It depends on the amount of data that you have access to, the amount of funds that you have access to, right? But speaking of the things that you mentioned, MTA models, MMM models, incrementality testing, we are in a place where an increasing number of platforms are realizing that especially the aspect of incrementality testing is going to be so crucial to establish that trust and confidence in the numbers that they're reporting. I know there's been reports coming out from both Google and Meta these past couple of weeks, really emphasizing the importance of running incrementality tests to sort of establish that sort of ground truth in terms of the performance that you're seeing. And then, as you said, Jonatan, sort of finding a good framework to use all of these three different approaches in a scalable way together. That's just going to keep picking up pace, but that's definitely the direction that we're on. And the journey's begun.
Yeah. And I would like to become more practical and look at your case, Jonatan. But first, maybe you can describe what are the requirements, Jessika, for success in measurement?
I would say a lot of it comes back to what you mentioned, Jonatan, having that clear definition of what are you out to measure, what is important for you, and especially having a clear plan of the types of decisions that you are looking to take based on the information that you are collecting, right? Because if you just have a nice dashboard or, a vanity metric of sorts, it's still not going to change the way that you operate and change the way that you're making decisions. So it really comes back to having a clear plan. And from then on, it inevitably comes down to the type of data that you have access to. When we're talking about incrementality testing, MMMs, that is typically something that is more accessible to bigger brands just because they're very data intensive. But I do think that there are a lot of things that smaller brands can do as well, really asking themselves, okay, how does my sort of target ROAS impact the sort of incremental effect that I'm seeing based on my meta ads, for example? If you're setting it super high, well, then you're essentially telling the platforms to only go after customers that are really likely to convert anyway. So you're essentially wasting your ad spend there. So there are a lot of different levers to pull, and it really depends on sort of the maturity of your brand, sort of which ones that will give you sort of the most bang for the buck, if you will.
All right, and to me, Asket still is a quite small brand.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm thinking you still got it right. So my question is like, how did you get it right, and what did the process getting there look like?
For smaller brands like Asket, I think it's a lot about being able to confidently find marketing channels and activities that work, that you feel like I'm confident that this actually performs and work, and then being able to scale those. Because if you can identify a few that works, then you can stay focused. I mean, we have a small team. We can't run on everything. And then, so stay focused and not spread yourself or your budget too thin. So like finding those levers of, okay, both upper funnel, mid funnel, low funnel, this seems to be working. And I feel confident in our measurement approach and the KPIs that we look at that this is actually working. Scale those and then try to run a little bit of a, test and learn on the side with a small part of the budget to identify kind of new things that work, so you can kind of add those in and then start scaling those as well. Because I always come back to that. I want it to be like, okay, now we identified these 4 things that work. Okay, then we're done. Like now we can just run with those. But like those activities or channels themselves will always change. So you have to adapt and make sure that you kind of continue to be at the forefront of that channel. But also like things change. So certain of those activities will work, and then over time they work less and less well. So then you have to add in new things. But yeah, for us, I think it's about having the confidence in when you start to see an activity or a channel working, that it's actually like incremental performance. And this seems to be not just, last click ROAS boosting through the roof, and be able to like, okay, now we're at the point where we can actually scale the spend here, and we can see that coming back into our not marketing KPIs, but our actual business KPIs, like number of new customers or just the overall sales.
Can you give us an example of something where you first identified something that works and how you scaled it?
I think it's it's fitting now with you being here. I think podcast is a good example for us, where I think Asket is quite it's a little bit of a complex brand from time to time, and we have a lot of things that we want to say. So sometimes we can be like, if you take paid social as an example, you have such a short attention span that it's hard for us to kind of stand out. Our garments and our products, they don't stand out that much. But in podcast, you get a bit of a longer space for your ads. And I think versus other brands, we feel like we have more of a story to tell. So we started out in Sweden, trialing different podcasts, and we could find, certain ones that work well for us. And we could see that, okay, we run, a discovery survey where people tell us how did they discover Asket. And we could see like it's picking up in terms of mentioning podcast as the source of discovery. And it's been working well in Sweden for a few years. But then we kind of trialed it a little bit in Germany, in the UK. But I think this first half year, this year, we trialed a few different podcasts in the US, and we could see that a certain of those worked well. And like doing that together with, for example, like paid social, more upper funnel, it was like the first time where I felt like, okay, we're able to scale the US actively. Before, it's been more organic for us. I mean, the US has been a big market, but it's kind of happened by itself. But now we could actually like control it a little bit more. And I think that was, strong for us.
Jessika, what's the role of data and execution, and how do you combine this? I mean, you've seen tons of different accounts through your, DMA and all the insights you get from that. What patterns you see there?
Well, I feel like a common pattern for like making data work for you is coming back to the tools that you have at your disposal. I mean, the tools obviously feed on the data, and in return, you get sort of insights into sort of which actions you should take. So a big thread there is, of course, bridging this sort of actionability gap. And I feel here there's a lot of work to do from the vendor side to make sure that, our engineering teams are building products that actually work for teams that are working with this actively on a day-to-day basis. There is for sure a big gap there. That's becoming increasingly narrow. But I mean, it's easy for, from an engineering perspective to say, well, increase your spend in Google by 10%. But there's like a bunch of different ways that you could potentially do that. So it's about being even more precise in the recommendations that you're able to give. So it's actually not another tool that, increases your lack of confidence, but rather sort of works with you. I mean, in an ideal world, measurement tools would just be sort of there in the background, feeding your results in a very seamless way, rather than something that you sort of have to put a massive amount of effort into both setting up, but also continuously monitoring. I mean, we see sort of movements, especially in the US, where there's sort of an active integration between measurement tools and, take, for example, Facebook, where measurement tools are feeding data back to Facebook to improve their algorithms. So I think that's definitely a movement that we'll see growing also here. And of course, makes the sort of case for privacy-safe measurement even more important. So it's definitely going to be more of a hands-off approach, but that also puts a huge requirement in establishing trust, because you don't want to have a model that just goes rogue. I mean, ChatGPT tries to lie to you, right? So there's a huge sort of need for both an understanding, but also, making sure that you're always doing a good job, right? It's especially here in Sweden, it's a small market. People talk, which is so nice to see so many of you guys here today. But I mean, you're forced to always, stay at the top of your game, because things move really, really fast.
And I think for a smaller brand like us, I mean, if we could choose between having, 3 different platforms for MMM, incrementality, and attribution modeling, where all of them were, 10 to 20% better, we still wouldn't want that over having all of them in one, because we have a small team. We need to find a way to, as you said, actionability. Like, how can we make sure that we can manage the tools that we have with the team that we have? It can be like, I think for us, we went a little bit into a trap before where we had a great tech setup, like on paper. Like, we built this, architecture, like, oh, this looks amazing. It's a Ferrari of a econ tech setup. But then it was like, but we're a small team. We don't have the capacity, because there's a lot of customization here, and building the different dashboards or taking the different actions requires quite a lot of manual labor and analysis. So, I mean, now we've gone to what we think is a more functional setup where, I mean, things are not as custom, but we can manage it in a better way, and we get, more out of it with even a smaller team.
And that's an interesting point, where you have to match the IT stack, or basically the complexity of your data, with the team and the input you can put into that. But I'm wondering, like, how big are the differences between different brands and different companies? How much of a difference is it in the setup and in the actual measurement when it comes to different brands and companies?
I think the sort of differences set up is not on the tech side of things. It's definitely on the operational side of things. I mean, we're super proud of all the brands that we're working with today. They do have slightly different setups depending on their needs and maturity. Not all of them work with MMM, for example. Far from all of them work with incrementality testing. But I would say that tool is not going to be sort of the make it or break it difference, right? I mean, all brands started off somewhere, right? And some are just doing a really great job at doing that growth.
Yeah.
So it comes back to, having, before this, we talked about sort of, managing your team, right? And finding the right team setup. And how do you create that confidence in those teams to make long-term decisions, so you're not just, chasing short-term wins that might actually not serve you well in the long term. So for me, that's all it comes back to. Making sure that your team has the right sort of tools at their disposal to deliver the best work that they can. That's 100% the difference between brands that are excelling versus the ones that are really struggling.
And I think the challenges are quite different for kind of larger companies versus smaller companies, where I think for the larger companies, it's more around the decision making and having a good process there. I mean, making sure that there's like a unified view of what is performance across the company, and making sure that you don't do kind of optimizing in silos, and also like just interpreting or like marketing lingo and marketing KPIs into business KPIs so that you can get buy-in from non-marketing management and leadership. I think that's key for large companies. For smaller companies, I think it's what we talked about before. It's more identifying true performance and like how can I scale it in an efficient way, so without kind of spreading myself too thin or not being able to run the setup that I have.
And where is this heading now? And the context here I want to explain is, I mean, we went from, in 2002, from measuring clicks to, 2016 to measuring cost of sales, to very much more complex environment today. And in order to be competitive within online marketing and digital marketing today, you have to step up the game, it feels like. You have to measure things in a way more complex, detailed way before. So if you plot out the current status quo for an additional 3 to 5 years, where are we heading, Jessika?
I think there's going to be a huge change in the sort of status quo in the coming 3 to 5 years. I would say the status quo today is still very sort of click focused, a lot of in-platform reporting, which still serves a really important role going forward. But I think the sort of big shift that we're going to see coming back to, as you mentioned, Jonatan, triangulation, getting those additional directional points, that's going to be a huge shift. And especially looking at the incremental effect of what you're getting back in terms of your marketing, so that brands really understand. Because I feel like that's the big sort of challenge with measuring clicks, right? There's no signal there as to whether that click was the sort of crucial breaking point to that conversion. So that's going to be a huge shift, actively sort of running tests across different geographies, so you really know the sort of true effect of, say, a meta awareness campaign. And I mean, in order to do that at scale, of course, there's going to be, a lot of tech stuff that you need to set up. I'm biased here. It's what I'm fortunate enough to work with every day here at Demma. But I mean, based on the brands that, again, you asked, who are doing well, who are not doing well, I would say the brands that are doing exceptionally well really have adapted this mindset shift of moving away from click-based metrics and towards looking at incremental effects instead.
I mean, even if we look, almost 10 years back, I mean, MMMs were there, multi-touch attribution was there, incrementality testing was also there, but it was not accessible. I mean, you needed such a huge team to run it, and it was hard to kind of stitch the data together and use it in any efficient way. So I think for us, it's more about like, and I mean, I haven't been paid to be here from Demma, but like for us, I think the best part with Demma so far and what they're putting together is having it all in one platform and being able to manage it in one place. And then even better if like the different measurement tools can actually talk to each other, or like you can use one to calibrate the other, because they have their strengths. Like incrementality testing, it's close to the truth, but it's very hard to run. You can't look at it on a day-to-day, like it's going to be more of a snapshot. But if you can use that result to feed into the MMM, and then you can use the MMM to calibrate your in-platform ROAS or something like that, then it starts to be really strong. And you like the decisions on the different levels, from operational, like daily, weekly, to tactical, to strategic, you can actually start to have a very functional setup there and make sure that those decisions inform each other, kind of.
And guys, thank you so much for the time. I have one last question. If people want to get in touch with you, how do they contact you? Let's start with you.
I mean, either through LinkedIn, or my email address is very easy. It's Jonatan without an H @asket.com.
Yeah, same for me. LinkedIn, or Jessika with a K, not a C, at demma.ai.
Jonatan and Jessika, thank you so much. Let's give a warm applause for the panel.